Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Mission Critical Painting stream. Thanks for coming in to hang out with us. I am Matt Holland. I'm the Sales and Marketing Program Manager here at Renegade, and I also do some miniatures painting in my spare time. So I'm hosting Miss Lila Mev here, the Mini Witch. How's it going, Lila?
It's doing great. I am so excited to be here and paint this model.
And speaking of this model, who is that there? This is not what I've seen in the stuff that's come out so far for Mission Critical.
This is Zartan.
Nice. So Zartan, leader of the Dreadnoks, I think a big fan favorite mini. And you've got that primed. You've got the Zenithal priming and kind of base highlighting going on. But I think with only an hour, you should probably get started painting, and I'll feed you some questions from the chat
Sure thing.
and kind of get talking to people. So the very first thing that people might not be aware of is, what is Zenithal? Why is that? Because it's kind of got a two-tone look to it right now.
hmm
What is that, and then why do you start with that?
Okay, so what zenithal highlighting does, it is the active, usually it's done with an airbrush, but it doesn't have to be. It can be done with a rattle can or with dry brushing, but it is basically mimicking the light of the sun. So you take a white with your airbrush, rattle can, whatever, spray that from above so that it hits your model. And so then in theory, this is what the lighting would look like if a model was outside on a rather cloudy day. So basically, I have
Sure.
already illustrated the values that I would need for this model. So
Yep.
if you wanted, you could photograph this. That's something that I did a lot when I was a beginner. I don't anymore. Honestly, I kind of zenithal highlight out of habit. But if you wanted to, if you were feeling like you wanted to practice your volumes, then you could photograph it.
Sure, that makes sense. I like it a lot because, yeah, it makes it really clear from the get-go, like what should be in shadow and what should be bright. And if you use, like, depending on the paints you're using, because I don't know exactly what you're using, but if you're using things like the what Army Painter speed paints, Citadel
Yes.
contrast paints, or the Vallejo ones,
hmm
they're a little bit more transparent than typical acrylic paints, and the Zenithal comes through and gives you like a really easy gradient of bright to dark.
Right. I don't usually use those types of paints just because uh, my default is always like display quality. I want to paint these things to look the absolute best that I can make them.
Certainly.
But if you were just going for speed, then the contrast paints or the Army Painter speed paints are definitely a great tool to use.
Yes. And for people who are painting their mission critical or like heroes of the grid, when you're doing something like a foot soldier, like a Cobra Trooper or putties where you've got to do 20 of them, it can be a lifesaver to do a Zenithal Prime, hit them with a contrast or a speed paint, and you're like 90% of the way done with a really nice looking like table ready mini. But
Yeah,
somebody like Zartan definitely deserves that little bit of uh, extra thing. So I see you're starting with looks like the skin tone, and Luke in the chat has a question. Any tips on getting better at painting eyes? I wonder this too because I generally just kind of leave a little bit of drop of wash in there to suggest the hint that there's an eye there. And it's not easy, and it's always stressful to feel like you're going to screw up a model you spent a long time on.
so typically I start with the area that is the most difficult first. So if I
Okay.
am really worried about the eyes, I'll start with the eyes first. That way, if I totally mess up the model and feel like I need to like strip it and start again, I'm not wasting a bunch of other progress. If I'm really proud of my non-metallic metal and then I mess up the face, that's like a tragedy. But if I just
Yes.
mess up on the eyes from the get-go, it's not really as big of a deal. For this model, since so much of his face is covered by his bow, he's going to be difficult to paint for the face, but I will certainly attempt, and I don't promise how well. Between the bow, I'm not sure how well I'll be able to stream it, but I can talk you through what I do. So I usually um typically I would actually paint the eyes before I even paint the skin.
Oh, okay. So you can
Uh
kind of clean up the white like around the eye as you do the skin, or
right.
Okay.
So usually what I do is I do a dark color first, and basically this is going to be the eyeliner of my model. And that way it's going to help the eyes pop out more. And then once this eyeliner is dry, I will go back in with a white. And then I actually, for the pupils, I have a marker that I use and I cheat and I
Oh,
draw
okay.
the pupils on. This is a Micron 003 marker, and this is what I use for the pupils. It's a great
That's a good
choice
idea.
to do it this way.
Uh, and we got a little shout out for you, Lila, from Rachel Lyons. She says, "So stoked to have Lila on here. Her mini painting channel has completely changed the game for me." So I think
Thank you.
some of your fans come in to see you paint some GI Joe here.
That means so much to me. Thank you. I love hearing from my fans. It's one of my favorite things. When I have a side note that I have screenshots of some of my favorite comments so that whenever I'm feeling really down,
Oh,
I'll
fun.
just go read all those comments.
See, I do the opposite. When I am feeling, too full of myself, I go read the comments on like YouTube videos I'm in, and then it just brings me back down to normal.
I mean, I have those too. I just don't screenshot them.
And then we talked about this before you started or before we started the stream, but tell me a little bit about that little gizmo that you have holding the mini, because I think a lot of people start off just, you know, the claw holding the base of the mini, desperately trying not to touch anything that you've already painted. And that looks like something pretty handy.
So I have what is called the hobby holder from Game Envy. I absolutely love this piece of equipment. It is a piece of equipment that I talk about basically in any tools video that I do, where I talk about tools that you need to improve your miniature painting. This tool is included because I love it that much. The reason that I love it so much is because of this little handle right here. So what you can do with this handle is it is for balancing and like resting your grip on. So when you need to do those tiny details like the eyes, you can stabilize by resting your wrist on this hand,
Sure.
resting your hand on this arm. And then also you can turn it upside down and have a grip this way as well. So this arm's a big deal, is a big deal for me, especially if you have shaky hands or have problems with your aim. This little arm makes a huge difference.
I got you. And if you're just starting off painting minis, people at home, you can also take like a paint pot and put some poster tack on top. And I have some of those, like, I mean, right here, I have a Citadel paint pot with some poster tack on top that I will put the minis base on. And that just gives you a better and more ergonomic handle while you're painting. And of course, you can get something like what Lila there is using to improve it even more if you are really getting into painting and painting your whole Mission Critical set, or all your heroes of the grid, because that is not a small job.
I also recommend pill bottles. Pill bottles also make
Oh, sure.
great ergonomical grips as well.
And then you avoid the question of, hey, if I needed this orange paint and I'm using it as my handle. So I've been there and done that. So you're just blocking in kind of, tell me about your process in general. Like for me, it's, the base coat, blocking in the colors. Then I'll usually go ahead and wash and bring out some of the darker details. What's your sort of general steps?
So, that is a really good question.
Or does it change like model to model?
No, it changes model to model. For this guy, I know that I want to do, so usually what I do is I paint the inside of the model to the outside of the model. So like for this guy, it would make more sense for me to paint his armor in here before I paint his bow out here.
Sure.
So that's usually how I work. Why did I paint the skin first? Because skin's usually the hardest, so I just start there. And also this paint requires multiple layers. So while this paint is drying, I can then work on other areas.
That's a good technique too. What kind of paints are you using? Or is it just kind of, I know a higher end mini painters, maybe they have a white they really like and a blue they really like and an orange, or do you use one line?
Oh no, I use so many different lines. Let's see, I've got Green Stuff World for my skin tone. I have reds that I'll be using later that I have Chimera. I was considering doing non-metallic metal, and for non-metallic metal, I was going to do scale color and fantasy and game. So it really, the different brands of paint really do have different types of consistency. And so depending on what I'm wanting to paint, I will use different brands of paint. But for the most part, I just use whatever colors that I really like. The only brand that I'm really hard set on is that I must use the Chimera Magenta because I absolutely love magenta and I refuse to use anybody else's magenta except for Chimera's magenta.
Nice.
But it really makes sense for you to learn what way you like to paint and then buy the paints that work best with that. So if you really like to do glazing, then Green Stuff World paint is amazing. If you really like to do layering, then Scale 75 might be better. For just general overall paints that are good, if someone just is just starting and they don't really know what technique that they want to be trying, then I recommend Pro Acryl or Reaper. Those are the best, like, just general paints for layering or wet blending or for anything else. Those are the paints that I recommend for someone new and just starting out.
And I think that's how a lot of our customers who are getting into painting are in that brand new thing where, maybe Mission Critical or Heroes of the Grid are their first game with miniatures that they really want to, step up and paint to have that really cool experience and really great table presence. So that's great advice. S. Johnson, pointed out that in this case, like you could cut the bowstring and then paint the face and everything and reattach. I think that's generally like all the Mission Critical and Here's the Grid stuff is one piece. They come assembled and ready to play with. But I know, at least in my experience, it's not uncommon to, if you have somebody holding a rifle by the face or something like that, to maybe paint that before you attach the arm or the gun. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Painting and pre-assembly, if you need to, is so important, especially in other games like Marvel Crisis Protocol and Warhammer, games that require assembly. Painting and subassembly is key to making sure that you can paint all of the elements that you want to paint.
And was that, you were doing the armor there with just a metallic silver paint, correct?
Right. So this metallic silver paint is from Imperial Hobby Paints. This silver is my absolute favorite silver. You've probably never heard of Imperial Hobby Paints.
I have not.
I had not either. They asked me if they could send me paints for free, and I absolutely swear by this silver. It's just like one guy making paints in his basement, but this silver is the best silver.
Well, I wanted to bring it up because you've mentioned non-metallic metals a couple times, and that's that is an area of painting that I've never ventured into yet. But I know a lot of people don't even know what that is. And tell me if I describe this accurately. So like you're using a metallic paint here to do the silver. That's what I typically do. It's pretty easy. It has actual kind of metallic pigments or pigments designed to look metallic in it. Non-metallic metals is using paints that are not metallic, just regular paint to sort of create the reflections and the shininess of metal just by building up the colors, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
I love doing non-metallic metals. I think that it's very meditative. But not everybody has time for that. Oh no, my contrast paint is bleeding. Well, we'll fix that. That's okay. We're not worried about it.
And see, this is the real thing, not movie magic. This actually is how it happens sometimes.
Yes, but this is a model that I painted, and so you can see the reflections on her breastplate. All of this is just done with matte paint. There is no metallic paints used on this model. So the sword and everything is all painted just to look like it is reflective, but it's all done with just matte paint.
The ones that really blow me away is like almost like chrome looking stuff where they've painted, the reflection of like the desert scene that this mini is inhabiting. Like that just blows my mind when I see it done really well.
I love that sort of stuff. So when it's done like that, it's called sky earth non-metallic metal
Okay,
because it's reflecting the sky and the earth.
makes sense.
I love doing that sort of thing, but you really have to plan ahead when you're going to do something like that because I usually to the base last. And if you're trying to paint all of your non-metallic metal and then at the last minute decide, you know what? What
Snow
if I
base
did?
instead of the desert one I was going to do.
Yeah, and then suddenly it's a really big I have never done that before. I've never spent hours on a model only to at the last minute decide to add in a base that now no longer matched the sky earth non-metallic metal that I had already painted in. I have no experience with that.
You didn't learn this the hard way.
No. No.
And I guess also one of the reasons maybe that you did not choose to do non-metallic metals in this miniature is that we've got an hour to paint a miniature from start to finish, which is how long would it take you to paint a miniature like this if you were just doing it for fun, but you were, or maybe say you're doing it to enter a contest, you really wanted to make it look very nice, or it's a commissioned piece. How long would you spend on a miniature, like this, a single trooper?
Um, since this model is larger, it actually makes it a bit easier. So maybe like 10 hours.
Okay.
If I was like going really hard and wanted to make this really good, yeah, probably about 10 hours.
Okay. So everything that we're going to be showing here is a little bit of a like the TLDR of painting a miniature like this. It's going to look great on the table, great when you're playing at your board game night. But if you're painting the, dozens of minis that you have for Mission Critical, 10 hours per is maybe not realistic. So hopefully this is a good, some good tips and some good things that people can apply to their own miniatures.
Exactly. So I really like contrast paints depending on the color. I think that their browns are amazing. Their reds are pretty good. But for like leather or bags or boots, the brown is so helpful, especially because those areas are boring. I don't want to spend time on those areas anyway. So being able to just put the contrast paints on there makes it so much easier so that I can actually spend time painting the areas that I want to paint.
And for those people who, are wondering, like, what's contrast paint? So they're in about the last 3 years, I think.
Yeah, about 3 years.
Games Workshop, Citadel Paints put out contrast paints. Army Painter has followed up with Speed Paint, and I know Vallejo has their own version too. I think it's called Express. But they are a paint that is a little bit less heavily pigmented and designed to flow once you put it on the model. So normally, a lot of times, like say the browns, you'd paint the bag brown or the boots brown. Then a lot of times somebody would go in with a brown wash, and a wash is it's like a very, very thin, almost like ink-like consistency. And that pools in all the recesses so that the folds of the boots or like the area where the tongue and the laces are holds that darker pigment and gives a lot more definition. The contrast paints, express paint, speed paints, they kind of do that in one step. It's maybe not exactly the same, but for a lot of people, it's good enough. And it saves you a step, saves you buying more paints, and it's pretty fast too.
Yeah,
so you use that for like that look like the pants or something?
So I did contrast paints on the pants and then on his little cape cloth area. Although we can tell how that went because it has now bled down into his armor. We're doing it live. It's totally fine. Mistakes happen to everybody.
I just lost my background briefly.
So when this happens to you guys, just know this is just, what? It's totally fine. This is what's great about mini painting. They're just pieces of plastic and that's okay.
Let's see. Rachel has a question. What's the longest you've ever spent on a single miniature?
30 hours, I think, is probably my record.
And was that a single figure like that, or was that something bigger?
It was huge. It was actually the model that I messed up on when I decided at the last minute to do my Sky Earth non-metallic metal and the base. It was I play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends in my spare time, and it was the campaign ending big boss for the whole game. And he was probably 6 inches tall, clad in armor, and so I did non-metallic metal on the whole thing. And he had a big sword, non-metallic metal on the sword, and all that fun stuff. So that was probably like 30 hours worth of painting.
And now, do you ever use an airbrush, whether for small minis or for bigger things like that, where you have to lay down, big armor plates on a tank or a Titan or something?
I love my airbrush. I highly recommend for anyone who wants to really get into miniature painting to get an airbrush. Now, you don't need an airbrush, even if you could enter competitions
Certainly.
and never have an airbrush. But if you want an airbrush, if you're looking for what's the next way that I can level up my miniature painting, an airbrush is a great way to do it. I love my airbrush.
I live in Minnesota, and it's freezing cold for 9 months out of the year. So even if all I did was prime my miniatures with an airbrush, that would be a huge help. And once I ventured out into using it for more techniques, it's been really nice too. But man, even just for priming, being able to do it whenever I want, not have to worry about the primer being too cold or too humid, has been a lifesaver.
Right. Definitely.
Jason says he's been using the slap chop method for his G.I. Joe minis. So slap chop, if people are like looking for painting tutorials and stuff, it is kind of a buzzword, I feel, for the style of painting of like Zenthial Prime, hit it with your contrast or speed paints, and then go in and do some details. It can be very fast and efficient, especially when you're painting a lot of things. And there's a lot of tutorials and people talking about it on YouTube right now.
Yes, I did a tutorial on slap chop.
Well, there you go.
Yep.
And Lila's YouTube is Lila Mev. So youtube.com/Lila Mev. You can go in there and see, all of her tutorials and videos, all that sort of thing.
Yep.
And you can see already that Zartan, like, the miniature is coming to life as you get these base colors down.
Yeah, I'm letting this area dry, and then I'll go back in and fix that cape, because that was just a sad affair. That my amazing silver mixed with that red cape. So we're gonna let that dry, and then we'll go back in and fix it.
I feel like every painter, has those moments where you're like, is this dry enough for me to work right next to it? And you're like, yeah, it'll be fine. And a lot of times it is, but not always.
I used to have a sticky note above my desk that said, let the paint dry, because I am notorious for not letting the paint dry before I'm trying to do my next layer or whatever else. So this is completely normal, unfortunately.
My strategy for avoiding that is I'll be painting 6 miniatures at once. So I'll go through and do each step on each mini in sequence. So I've got my skin tone out. I'll paint the skin on, several Joes and a couple Cobra Troopers. Then I'll come back through and do all the browns together. That keeps me from running into that problem as much. But when you're doing this all at once in an hour, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I'm trying to get everything done in my hour. So,
and for those of you who might be saying, oh, that's not the right color scheme for Zartan. Well, let me tell you, there's so many color schemes for Zartan that it will melt your brain trying to figure out exactly which one you should use for a certain thing. So go with what you like.
If anybody wants to correct me on my colors, that they're welcome to do so.
And as he is a master of disguise, like who are we to say that he's not in some kind of disguise right now?
I just really like the silver pan. I just wanted to keep using it.
Yeah, I had not heard of that brand, but man, that is a thing about painting. There is a unending variety of brands and types of paint some people use. You can use oil paints for oil wash. You can use, some people will use different like acrylic and there's another one I'm thinking of, but different paints that interact differently with different solvents or thinners to get different effects and things. It can be pretty crazy, especially like when you're watching people do scale model stuff where they want to do all the detailed bits on an airplane's wing and the oil that's dripping from the rivets.
Yes, exactly.
So
Well,
you can
and
really go as deep as you want.
I'm sort of a contrarian where I look at the box art and I go, well, I'm going to specifically not do that. But I'm welcome to feedback. If somebody wants to tell me that I painted this guy incorrectly, I will listen. But since I believe his eyes are dry, I'm going to attempt to go in with my white. I'm trying to make sure that my head isn't about to block the camera. That's really the problem. All right.
So this is the white part, and then you will do the dot with the marker.
Correct. Okay. So I tried to do a very delicate dot, and none of the paint came off of my brush, which means that I need to wet my brush a bit more. And then I'm going to re-dip it into my paint. One way that you can test this before you start going into your model is you can test it on your hand and just do a little dot. And if it doesn't do a perfect little dot on your hand, then it's definitely not going to do it on the model.
Good tip. I also just find myself like wiping the brush on my hand before I go to the miniature a lot anyways, and I end up with a lovely rainbow of all the colors I used that night.
Yes, I frequently wear gloves for that reason.
Yep.
Right.
S. Johnson, for anybody who's looking at this and like, geez, I just can't do that, but I want to step up my miniatures in some way, there is a thing that's become pretty common with like big miniatures game Kickstarters. Well, they call it sun dropping, but it was also, it's been around forever. Like you can basically take a shade, and I think Army Painter makes like a can for this purpose that is a basically a wash. You just dip the whole model in it, set it down to dry, and you can do that with a bare plastic model. The shade will get down into the crevices, give it some definition, make the details pop, and you can just play with it like that. Not even painted. You've just basically upped the contrast on your plastic miniature. And a lot of big Kickstarters will come that way, or it's an extra cost. But it's a very low effort way to just improve the look and make your miniature stand out at the table a little bit more.
I have never heard of sun dropping. This is new to me. I've never heard of this.
It's just washing a bare plastic miniature.
Interesting. Taking notes for my YouTube channel.
And when you have a Kickstarter that has 100 different miniatures and you're not a painter, that is an option.
Interesting. All right, I actually think that. So since I got my silver into my contrast paints for the red, I think I'm gonna have to go back in with just a regular red and paint over it. That's totally fine. I'm gonna use Chimera because that's my favorite. Chimera.
Is this the magenta, or is this a variation?
No, I'm just gonna do red because I know his little head. I know his scarf is red. So even if I got nothing else right, his scarf is red.
Elsa says that she's impressed with the superpower of painting with long hair and not needing to tie it up.
Did you not notice me pick it off my hand earlier?
The other sort of rite of passage for all miniatures painters is drinking out of your paint water cup.
I don't do that because I have this cup where that makes it very obvious. Like I am not drinking. I did yesterday dip my dirty paintbrush into my coffee cup though.
Well, there you go. That's just a new technique. Before you know it, it's going to be a unique pigment, a unique brown.
That's actually, I posted about it on Instagram with the caption of "It's Monday," and that's what people are saying. Yeah. Also, if you're having problems, so this is what is this called? This is museum putty. It's basically blue poster tack, except it's a lot stickier. If you're having
sure, I've heard of that stuff.
If you're having problems because your model won't stick to it, I'm not going to do it right now, but you can take a X-Acto blade or something and cut grooves into here, and that will help it stick.
Yep, yeah, you can, or a little bit of sandpaper or something to rough up that smooth plastic base. Will give it some more grip. I have to do that when assembling miniatures sometimes, score the inside of the joints so that the glue has something to grab onto.
Yes, all the time.
I've also got some kind of wax. I don't know what it's called, or it is, but it's a similar to that museum putty, a wax that's used to like mount things, and I've used that on the bottom of miniatures to stick them to handles too. And of course, the other option is the Games Workshop makes a one that has like a spring-loaded jaw, so that'll actually just grip the base, and those are pretty nice too. But it does not have that nice little hand rest that Lila was showing off and talking about how you can really brace nicely.
I'm telling you, this little brace is the answer to, okay, maybe not all of your problems, but like a significant amount of your problems. All right, I'm going to do a little bit of highlighting on his face. And so I am taking a lighter color and I'm just going to hit the high points of his face.
So highlighting was a thing that I struggled with. I mean, I don't think I'm great at it at it or anything, but I always found that as I was starting to do it, it just looked out of place to me. But then once I finished, and you hold the mini about 2 feet away from your face, it all kind of just blended in and looked right. Is that kind of a common feeling as you're highlighting?
So if you're just doing something for the tabletop, then that's totally fine. Otherwise, when I am working, I do something called feathering, and I am taking my still wet brush and I am basically blending back and forth that paint that I just applied to help blend it out.
Okay, so you get a little bit more of a gradual transition.
Right, or you could do glazing. So usually feathering and glazing are the two ways that you can hide those larger steps between your colors. And glazing is when you take very thin paints and blend it over top of the two previous colors that you've already applied.
Oh, that kind of just brings them together by adding those thin coats over the top. Okay.
Exactly, but normally I end up doing my feathering, and whenever I do glazing, I end up feathering anyway. So I highly recommend learning feathering for anybody who is really wanting to get that smooth blend. Of course, you don't need to do a smooth blend anyway. Smooth blend is not a mark of a excellent painter. You don't need to be able to blend smoothly to paint well. So don't let that hold you back. Texture is totally fine. But if that's what you want, highly recommend learning to feather.
The Full Force podcast is a great question. This is for both of us, but I'll let you go first. What got you into painting minis? How'd you get started?
Sure. So I actually wanted to start sculpting ball jointed dolls. That was the game plan. And I'm terrible at it. But I had all of these
sculpting like traditionally, like with clay and stuff. Okay.
Yep. That was the great plan. Like I said, was absolutely terrible at it. So I had all of these tiny brushes, and my husband had just convinced me to at least give Dungeons and Dragons a try. I thought that it sounded stupid and I didn't want to participate, but he wore me down and I agreed to try one session. And then I completely fell in love and decided that every character needed to have their own model and every bad guy needed to have their own model, and then just completely fell down the rabbit hole of miniature painting.
And so was that also sort of your gateway into gaming too? Through role-playing games like that?
Yep. It's all thanks to my husband. I always said that I didn't want to participate in that lame nerd stuff, and
and here you are.
Here we are.
Spending your Saturday night painting a G.I. Joe character on a lame nerd stuff game stream. Cool.
Yep. I actually just quit my full-time job 2 weeks ago to be full-time YouTube, so I am now full-time.
Oh, wow.
Lame
Congratulations. How things change. Full Force podcast for me. For painting, I've been playing board games for a long time. My sister asked for Power Grid for Christmas, and we pulled it out and played it on Christmas Day. And I blew my mind that like board games could be so interesting. And then from there on, now I just have board games come out of my ears. And I'd always thought that miniatures games were really interesting. I would look at them in the store. I would like kind of drool over like, Space Marines and all the cool stuff, but completely intimidated by painting until a guy named Mark Sarastro in the UK. He has a great YouTube channel doing tutorials, and his tutorials for Imperial Assault, Star Wars Imperial Assault, is what I started painting with. Painting, at first just exactly copying what he was doing, painting stormtroopers, and then painting probe droids, and eventually just got the confidence to branch out and paint more stuff. And now I play a couple different miniatures games. I'll be painting my GI Joe Mission Critical stuff as well. And it's just a very meditative and like calming, relaxing thing to do. Sometimes I'll listen to a podcast or an audiobook or watch a TV show that doesn't need a lot of attention, and I can paint for hours and hours and hours.
Yes, totally agree. I will completely lose track of time and then look up and go, oh no, I spent like 3 hours and I haven't eaten, and that's so sucked into painting.
Got to like uncramp all those muscles and like realize I've been hunched over, this one little guy for so long. But
Usually I paint with my elbows up on the table, and that makes a really big difference. But that's
good bracing.
Yes, but that's not as good for streaming. So I gotta be down here. But I highly recommend, especially now that I'm getting older at 31. Elbows up on the table. Now that I'm doing this for my full-time job, I feel it. Definitely feel it. So
do you ever use other aids like a magnifier or anything like that when you're painting, or is that something that you don't feel you need, at least at this point?
So every time I've tried to use magnifying glasses, I have found that I have incredibly poor depth perception and usually just end up smacking myself in the face with my brush. So I have not yet used magnifying glasses, although I've heard, great things. I know some of the absolute pros do use them, but I personally do not.
And I think for anybody who's, looking at this, like, yeah, I'm interested in painting. YouTube is just a wonderful source, whether it's Lila's channel, Sarastro. If you look up Daddy Louie, who has done a lot of our Power Rangers painting tutorials, like I feel like a lot of times you can find a video of a miniature that you're painting and get some great inspiration, or find one that's similar, or find one that focuses on a particular element. Like, I want to make the armor look really good, or I want to make the silver blades of the weapons of swords and things look really good. There will be a video tutorial for virtually everything. And it can be really helpful just to get a little bit of context and a little bit of confidence when you're trying something new.
Is Sarastro still painting? Is he still making videos? I haven't watched him forever.
Yeah, I think he's mostly doing things for Atomic Mass games now. Like they booked him for the foreseeable future. But yeah, he still does a lot of stuff. Okay. And that was just having someone walk you through it and saying like, oh, it's actually not that hard, was just a game changer for me. And now, like, you guys can't see it, but all under my 3 monitors here is full of paint racks of all sorts of crap that I have now.
I forgot that Sarastros was a thing. It's like a new light bulb has gone on. Oh yeah, I remember him.
And we have a lot of, if you just look on our YouTube channel, there's a lot of Power Rangers tutorials from Heroes of the Grid, which is same scale as Mission Critical. And there's a lot of techniques that you can get from that. Although, of course, GI Joe is typically a little bit more like realistic colors and more military or traditional military colors than Power Rangers. Of course, you have the Red Ranger, which is not camouflage at all. And then now you're going to have someone like Stalker or Roadblock who've got fatigues on. A little bit different.
So I am pulling out, I believe this is Tamiya panel line accent color.
Oh yeah.
This is
hi there, panel line buddy.
It's a great cheat to be able to line all of these little individual elements and help them pop. So there's all this texture and everything in here. And I suppose I could wash it. I'll show both.
There you go.
Fine. All right.
Yeah, this stuff's like magic. You put the tiniest little touch and it just goes everywhere.
Right. So you have to make sure that your paint is dry.
Hmm.
But did you see that little magic? It's just the tiniest drop.
Yep. And you can just see it like poof.
Right. I love lining all of these little elements because it really helps the model pop. It makes each little element look different, because otherwise what can tend to happen is that it all just sort of blends together and you can't really tell one piece from another piece. So I love doing this little panel lining stuff.
Trevor Chapman's asking, like for GI Joe, traditionally, military camo used to be more the blobs of color, and now a lot of it's moved to like digital camo. I know for vehicles, like I've seen stencil sets that are, very finely cut stencils that you can apply to get that digital effect. Is it possible or like realistic to try to do that on a individual model like this? Or is that one of those things where you kind of do a cheat and just kind of do you apply the paint in a way that is not necessarily pixels, but kind of gives that effect?
So if I was going to do something like that, this is just completely off my head. There might be tutorials on this, but
Sure.
completely off my head, I would recommend using a technique called stippling.
Oh yeah, okay.
I think I've got like a random base over here I can use. Okay, this one's got a little bit of a gradient on it, but we'll just ignore that gradient. But I'll use a totally different color. So what stippling is it's just taking like a round brush like this and basically just sort of mashing your brush in. But basically what you were doing is you're just leaving a texture behind or leaving like a bit of a random pattern. So I would layer this up and try to get that sort of pixel text, that sort of pixeled texture like this. So this would be my first thought, but like I said, I'm sure that somebody probably has a tutorial on how to do that better. But that was my first thought on how to do it. I have a video on stippling if anyone is curious. I have like 2 videos that are along the lines of every technique you need to know, and I cover stippling in that. So if being able to do this sort of texture like this, something you'd be interested in, I have a video on that. But stippling is also when I talked about how you don't need to do smooth gradients. I use stippling all the time to get like leather or fabric texture. So
Okay.
stippling is another technique that you can use on so much where you don't have to worry about blending at all.
And I think camouflage is an intimidating thing for a lot of people, especially like at these small scales. But like this guy, there's nothing fancy. It's just literally the light color of the shirt, and then I just dived on 2 different grays and a black, and you have a winter camo that looks just fine for pretty much any purpose you're doing. If you're trying to do, Stalker or Roblox fatigue pants and you want to do camo, go in, paint them dark green, go in with your brown, your black, and a lighter green, and just put little dabs in there, randomly different sizes. And when you look at it on the table, it's going to read to your eye as camouflage. Like if you go in with a microscope, yeah, it's not going to look like real BDUs or fatigues, but it's for me, especially when you're painting like a whole board game like this, you want to be able to play with it with your friends and not have to wait a year before I have it painted. You can get away with a lot less than you think and still have your game look fantastic.
A great way to cheat and see, do I really need to paint that section or do I need to paint it perfectly, is to hold your model out at an arm's length and see what it looks like from that distance. And if it's good enough to pass the arm length distance, then however you are painting for your actual table is going to be totally fine.
Yep, that's a great rule of thumb. Elsa says, I'm wondering if we'll get a guest experience from the cats or not, or if they've been stowed.
I lack them out just in case.
Mochi and Cardamom, it looks like.
Mochi and Cardamom. Mochi desperately wanted to be in here. He was very unhappy. They have a little spot in my office. They're like, oh, we're filming now. We're ready for the camera. We're over here being adorable. But so they were both very upset that they were that they were specifically not invited to the stream.
Do they push your miniatures off shelves?
No, they don't. Um,
It's a good feature in a cat owned by a miniatures painter. So,
Actually, so I have my office. This is my miniature painting office. The whole reason that I got an office, because I got an office before I became, like, before I started YouTube, is because Mochi stole a very rare limited edition model off of my desk that I was doing for a commission and ate part of it.
oh no.
It was, I actually just bought the model like 6 months ago at this point, but I finally decided that I wanted to repaint this model because the first time I had it, it was a commission. And when I bought it, it was $160 because it's out of print and, like I said, super rare and all that stuff. So my cat ate a $160 model from a client. And so
Ouch.
we moved apartments so I could have an office so that I never had to deal with that again. So they are both model stealers, not, they don't just randomly knock them off, but they will take them.
And when you're dealing with things like that, having these plastic models that are all one piece is great. Because if you knock one of my metal models off the shelf, then it explodes into many, many pieces.
Oh,
And I'll
yes.
tell you, sometimes that really makes me appreciate things like Heroes of the Grid and Mission Critical, where it's all just one.
Absolutely. Oh, no. Absolutely. So I like to do this sort of panel lighting or however else you want to do it. I do it on absolutely everything. So, like, I'm currently using it to,
Like around the hood, like kind of around the face, so it shows like the shade of the hood.
that is exactly what I am doing. Man, if anybody didn't believe that we were doing this live, there I just smacked the Tamiya panel lining. It's now everywhere. It's
Oh, and Renegade chiming in the chat that this Zartan is from the upcoming expansion Chaos Break. So Chaos Break adds both Zartan and two other dreadnoughts. I know one is Road Pig. Let me look up which one the other one is before chat beats me to it. I think it's Zarana. It's the other. It's the dreadnought lady. And
I
then it
got
also,
this one.
yeah, her
Got
Zarana. I was right.
this one. Oh,
And that is Road Pig with his big old like cinder block hammer. And then also adds Beachhead and Ripcord as two new Joes, and it adds two new vehicles as well. So that expansion is up for pre-order right now. And if you pre-order it, you will get the vehicle pack number 2 for free, which is a bunch more vehicles that you can call in to kick some Cobra tail. I don't know, anybody in chat, have you played Mission Critical yet? I played with Renegade producer Jimmy Lee, who actually produced the game just a couple weeks ago, and we were solidly in the driver's seat up until Cobra Commander showed up as the boss, and he wrecked our day real quick.
the important question is, was it still fun?
Oh yes, yes.
Oh, well, that's all that matters.
That's a thing we've run into with first Heroes of the Grid, where a lot of people who bought that game were Power Rangers fans and not necessarily board gamers. And even if they were board gamers, they were not hardcore like difficult co-op game players, and they found the game very, very tough at first. Although now, as the roster of rangers and options has expanded and people get better at the game, we have to keep making harder and harder bosses to keep people satisfied. And Layla, we have 10 minutes. Lila, we have 10 minutes.
Oh boy. Oh man, now the clock's really starting, isn't it? Somebody tell me, what color is his belt? Because I don't know what color his belt is.
We have a Zartan expert in the chat.
I hope we do.
Let me pull up some images here too. I see brown pouches. Sometimes the whole belt is brown. I would say it's brown or like a light brown.
Brown or up? All right. You insist. I can do brown or light brown. All
And
right.
obviously you have a very practiced hand, but you're going to have this whole miniature painted in an hour. That's definitely possible for something like a Cobra Guard or Cobra Trooper or Crimson Guard in Mission Critical, even for someone who's getting started, because most of that miniature is red. Private red, you're like halfway done. Or blue for the Cobra Troopers.
I do recommend if you're going to be doing washes and contrast paints and things like that. So right now his pants are really shiny, so I highly recommend going over it with a matte varnish. Now I highly recommend the Green Stuff World Max Matte Varnish. Basically, it's just going to, well, don't go over your metallic areas, only go over your contrast areas. But basically, it's going to mattify everything so that then the metallic areas really stand out.
I also find it useful. I like to varnish all the miniatures I paint just to keep them from, as I'm handling them, from the paint being damaged or wearing it all.
Definitely, definitely. I'm feeling the clock now. Now I feel it. Now, I was taking my time. I was relaxing. Thought I had this all under control.
The pressure is on.
Right. I'm actually, so I did go over his pants with a contrast paint. I don't think there's enough light in there. His pants are looking kind of boring to me. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to add some more highlights to his pants because I think they're boring.
There's one technique that you mentioned a long time ago we didn't talk about, but I think is a very useful one for people to know about, dry brushing. So can you, while you're working on this, tell people what dry brushing is and like how you might use it?
Sure. Dry brushing is such a great like beginner step.
Like a
Or,
life hack, kind of like.
yeah, I actually just did a video basically all on dry brushing. Sorry, my paint bottle's clogged. I'm trying to unplug it. We'll just use a different color. It's fine. Okay, we're gonna use this color. Okay. So dry brushing is taking I recommend a domed brush. There we go, domed brush. Looks something like this. This one is poorly cleaned, so, forgive me. I wasn't planning on pulling it out for this stream. But it is tightly packed. It is circular in nature. This one is from Army Painter. But if you were going to dry brush, basically, you know what? I'm just going to dry brush this model here. So for dry brushing, you dip your brush into your paint, and then there's a better way to do this, but we'll just do like the generic beginner way. You remove the majority of it off on a paper towel or something off to the side. And then you pull it down like this. And you can see how it's only hitting the raised areas of this model. So if she was primed brown or something, then you could see how you're only hitting those raised edges with the gold. So this is a great way to speed paint something if it is mostly a singular color. Since this guy has so many different colors altering between the silver and the brown, it's more difficult on him. But if you were doing like a standard G.I. Joe that was mostly green, then this would be a great,
like if you did a Cobra Trooper and you did
yes.
prime them in dark blue, you could dry brush a lighter blue, and that'll kind of give you a quick and dirty highlight over those raised areas, those upturned areas. I use it a lot for like fur. If you use like a brown contrast paint on fur, then hit it with a light dry brush, you'll get a really nice, additional set of tones. And it's very easy. The tip that I always say to people is like, get more paint off the brush than you think you'll need to, because you can always go back and add more. But if you slop on that first stroke and just cover the whole thing in paint, you're kind of up a creek. So err on the side of getting more paint off that brush. I test it out of the back of my hand a lot of times.
Yes, I always say like remove 75-80% of the paint before you put it on your model.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great one. That'll save you time if you're doing a lot of something that it can be used on. With his pants, because it's got the pants and the armor plates and the straps over it, it's hard to do on this particular miniature, but it's a good technique. And you had mentioned it in the context of Zenthial priming. If you don't have an airbrush or you don't want to use rattle cans or you can't for some reason, you could prime in black and then come in with a white dry brush, and you'll get a similar effect to what you started with, having probably used an airbrush.
Yes, if you want to look up a technique or look up videos on that, it's something that it's done in the slap chop technique that we talked about earlier. So if you look up the slap chop technique, you will definitely see how to do this sort of dry brush zenithal. Also, I recommend choosing a couple areas on your model that you want to focus on and painting those areas better than everything else. So I'm going to just spend a little bit of time on his boots and pants because those areas don't really matter. I would much rather spend more time up on his cloak and up on his face because those are the areas that are going to be a lot more interesting. So while
Sure.
yeah, I need to paint the pants and the pants and the boots and all that sort of stuff, but really I want to spend more of my time up on the face because those are going to be the areas that are far more important.
That's good advice. Any more questions from the chat as we are kind of entering our final few minutes, so I can pass them on to Lila and we can get some more useful tips.
We can do like a roulette. Just ask me questions. I got it.
He's looking pretty nice, I think. This does inspire me to I haven't painted in too long. I've just been too distracted with other things, but I do have I think this is Stalker, who I took home from the Gen Con paint and take that we'd set up, he's primed and ready to go. So I really don't have any excuse. I should just paint him.
You should. Listen, but usually holds people back because they feel like, I don't know if I have time. I don't know if I have time to do him justice. Just sit down and paint, and you'll probably have a lot more fun than you really realize that you're going to have. If you set up mental blocks about worrying about if you're going to do him justice and all that sort of stuff, then you're going to paint a lot less. So just sit down and do it and focus on having fun.
I would also recommend, if you want to paint a ton, don't have a child.
Cats are great. Have I recommended cats? Because highly recommend cats.
Full Force Podcast wants to know, what's the hardest thing about painting for you?
Having enough time to do it. You would think that as a full-time miniature painter like I am now, I would have so much time to paint. I do not. I spend so much time editing.
Sure.
So really, it's just having the time to paint everything to the justice that I want to paint it to.
I think one thing that is a challenge for me sometimes is just knowing when to say that I'm done with a miniature. I mean, sometimes you could basically just keep going on and picking out details and doing this in a little bit better way. Then you go in, you add OSL, or you do something else. And at some point you have to say, okay, I'm done with this one and I'm going to move on to the next one. And that is a skill, I think, that you build over time, where you realize, yeah, or like you said, prioritizing certain parts and not spending 6 hours lovingly painting the fatigue pants. All right. Well, we got to wrap it up because it's the next stream will be starting here very soon. That is the Reckland Run with Rule. It's going to be wrapping up our Renegade Con festivities, but I hope everybody enjoyed this tutorial. Lila, thank you so much for joining us. You just want to plug your website and where people can find your stuff?
Sure. If you just type in Lila Mev or look up The Mini Witch on YouTube, you'll be able to find me. I do beginner-friendly content. There's cats, so if you like cats, you should definitely check out my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for having me on tonight, and I hope that you guys all learned something.
Thanks for joining us, Lila, and thanks for joining us, everybody at home. Stick around to see Reckland Run and our Renegade Con wrap-up with Rule.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a great night.
Thank you for hanging out with me today. It looks like, I think it's Matt with somebody painting. They're doing the G.I. Joe Mission Critical. Ooh, very nice.